Hey guys, today's video is going to be a little bit different from my past videos because I'm going to be talking about the torture and murder of Sylvia Likens. Before I go on into the case, I just want to put a little disclaimer here. This case is probably one of the most horrendous and sad cases I've ever learned about. It deals with a lot of gruesome torture of this young girl. This case is very old. It happened in the mid-1960s. It's a very gruesome murder. I may even include pictures, I'm not sure yet. I just want you to be forewarned. It's not a very easy case to take in. It's very sad. I guess that's pretty much all. How I found out about this case is I had watched a movie on Netflix a few years back called A Girl Next Door. I remember seeing on the description of the movie based on true events or based on a true story. My curiosity was touched and I further did some research and I found this case of Sylvia Likens. The movie A Girl Next Door is actually loosely based. It's not a very credible source. There's actually another movie called An American Crime, which I have not seen. That is more of a relevant representation of the Sylvia Likens case. Okay, so now let's get into the case of Sylvia Likens. Sylvia Likens was born on January 3rd, 1949 to Betty and Lester Likens. Betty and Lester were carnival workers, so their work included a lot of travel. It was not a very well-paying job. Sylvia's parents had a total of 5 children. Sylvia was the third amongst these 5. She had 2 older siblings, Diana and Danny, and she had 2 younger siblings, Benny and Jenny. So family life for Sylvia was very difficult. Her family, they struggled financially. Her parents were both carnival workers. As I mentioned, the pay to be a carnival worker varied and sometimes there was jobs, sometimes there wasn't. Something that also weighed heavily on the family was Sylvia's younger sister Jenny had polio, which was very difficult and put a lot of stress on her parents. So in the summer of 1965, Betty and Lester finally separated. At this time, Diana, Sylvia's older sister, was off and married. Sylvia's older brother and younger brother, Danny and Benny, were living with their grandparents, which left Sylvia and Jenny living with their mother. It was very hard for Betty to provide for her 2 daughters. It left Betty no other choice but to shoplift, but that landed her in jail. Lester, Sylvia's father, given that he had to work, he needed somewhere for Jenny and Sylvia to live. So he ended up meeting Gertrude B was her real last name. I will put her real name on the screen, but during this time she went by Gertrude Wright. So Gertrude was a very depressed woman. She had 7 children of her own, ranging from 17 years old to a few months old. Gertrude and her 7 children lived in a very large rented house, and Gertrude herself was very poor, didn't have very much money. So when Lester asked Gertrude if she could look after Sylvia and Jenny for $20 a week, she quickly agreed and said, yes, I will watch your daughters. Unfortunately, Lester was very excited and relieved to have found a stable environment for his daughters. He didn't do much research when talking to Gertrude, didn't really ask about the living conditions they would be under, and kind of just let them be. So the first week for Sylvia and Jenny went very well with Gertrude. She was doing everything a normal kid would do. She would go to the park, she would listen to records. She really did try to help Gertrude out as much as she could. She washed dishes and she just helped around the house. However, things took a turn after the end of the week. Gertrude had not received the $20 payment from Sylvia and Jenny's father. So she took Sylvia and Jenny upstairs, slapped them around, and said, quote, I took care of you bitches for a week for nothing, because the check hadn't arrived when she anticipated it to. However, the next day the check was there and it must have just been running late. But this did not deter Gertrude from punishing the girls more. It was kind of a barrier break for the type of person Gertrude was. She continuously beat the girls. So if they did something wrong that Gertrude didn't like, she would punish them with a large wooden paddle or a thick leather belt and just beat them with it. I don't believe I mentioned Gertrude's description of what she kind of looked like. She was very thin and frail, and because of how thin she was, she would get very weak. And so when she couldn't carry out the beatings of Jenny and Sylvia, she would have her children beat them. I believe it was Paula, her oldest daughter, beat the girls. Eventually, Gertrude zeroed in on Sylvia alone. She kind of laid off Jenny, but really had this grudge against Sylvia and began just beating her for fun. She had her children do it as well, and then she soon ushered in other neighborhood kids. So some of the abuse consisted of using Sylvia as a punching bag, throwing her against the wall, chokeholds, and at times even knocking her into just an unconscious state. The beatings and the abuse also went from just beatings to more torturous abuse. Gertrude was a smoker, so she would extinguish her cigarette butts on Sylvia's skin, on her body. And Gertrude was just a very sick person. She laughed at these beatings on Sylvia and encouraged them and egged her kids on to beat her. Sylvia was also forced to take boiling hot baths in order to, quote, cleanse her of her sins. Gertrude would have Sylvia stand in the middle of the living room completely nude and would force Sylvia to insert foreign objects into her vagina, which included Coke bottles and other objects. The children and Gertrude also kicked Sylvia's genitals to the point where when the medical examiners examined that area, they were shocked at how many injuries that area had sustained. Since Sylvia's beatings were so intense, her bladder and her ability to just control her bowels had failed, so she would urinate in the middle of the night, unable to control it. Because of that, Gertrude decided to punish her for it and tied her down into the basement and had her completely naked. She was only untied when the kids or Gertrude herself wanted to beat on her. Gertrude liked to make up things about Sylvia. She would call her a whore and say that she was pregnant, say a lot of terrible things that were so untrue about Sylvia. And so Gertrude, with the help of a neighbor, wrote the words, "I am a prostitute," and proud of it on her stomach, got a needle, heated it up, and carved those words into her body. So at this point, Gertrude knew that she wanted to get rid of Sylvia permanently and was exploring ways as to how she would claim her innocence and kind of deter any speculation that police may have on her elsewhere. So she had Sylvia write a letter to Sylvia's parents claiming that she was basically a prostitute, confessing to them that she had performed and engaged in sexual acts for a gang of boys, and was blaming the beatings and the words across her stomach that had been burned on those boys. So soon after, a social worker had called Gertrude to investigate on a case from an anonymous person claiming that there was a young girl who had sores all over her body that was living with Gertrude. Gertrude admitted, yes, there was a girl living here with sores on her body, but that was due to just poor personal hygiene. Gertrude told the social worker that Sylvia had been thrown out because she had decided to become a prostitute, and Gertrude just did not want that in her household. So Gertrude had finished developing her plan. She planned to dump Sylvia's body in a rural, remote area and was going to use the letters Sylvia wrote to her parents as proof that Gertrude was innocent and had no idea what happened to Sylvia. So during this time, when Gertrude had finished her plan with getting rid of Sylvia, she would treat Sylvia very kindly, but then combat that by making her drink her own urine or feces. So she would offer her a sandwich here, but then would make her drink some of her urine. So as Gertrude had developed her plan, she was reciting it to her children, and Sylvia had actually overheard this conversation about how she wanted to dump her body and just basically get rid of her. Sylvia panicked, and on October 25th, she made an attempt to escape from the household, but unfortunately was found and beaten so severely. She had gotten a curtain rod to the face and was thrown down the basement stairs. And because this beating was so severe, Sylvia was unable to talk or move. She had made an attempt to walk to the stairs to get out of the basement, but had just fallen. When Gertrude had come down to the basement, she saw Sylvia laying on the ground and crushed Sylvia's head with her foot. On October 26th, the next day after the beatings, Sylvia was found dead from the beatings that she had sustained the night before. One of Gertrude's daughter actually had found Sylvia and called for her mother, and her mother just said, "Oh, she's faking it." Sylvia attempted to give her CPR, and moments later Gertrude came down and found Sylvia and realized she had actually died. So Gertrude went to phone the police. Gertrude and her children quickly bathed Sylvia, redressed her, and laid her back on the mattress she had been sleeping on. When police arrived, Gertrude quickly gave them the letters Sylvia had wrote to her parents that Gertrude had forced her to write, and had basically relayed the plan that the group of boys had beat Sylvia, and had her children who she had taught what to say recite that as well to them. And the story was that Sylvia was very promiscuous, and she had returned to the home after having sex with the gang of boys, who then had followed her back to the house and beat her, mutilated her, and subsequently killed her. The police were mortified at this, and so they quickly went to leave the home, but Jenny, Sylvia's sister, approached them before they left and told them, quote, "Get me out of here and I will tell you everything." So Jenny's statement had prompted the police to arrest Gertrude and 3 of her children. The police also ended up arresting 7 other children from the neighborhood. On May 19th, 1966, Gertrude was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. She gained an appeal, but again, she was convicted and sent back to prison. At no point did Gertrude show any remorse or regret for what she did to Sylvia. And when anybody asked her about what happened or why she did it, she stated, quote, "I had to teach her a lesson." And here is the kicker of this case. In 1985, Gertrude was released on parole and lived under a different name. 5 years later, after her release, she died of lung cancer. So Gertrude's oldest daughter, Paula, was also convicted of second-degree murder and was also sentenced to life in prison. 3 other boys from the neighborhood were also sentenced, but they were sentenced to manslaughter and were to serve 2 to 21 years in prison. Sylvia was buried in Oak Hill Cemetery in Lebanon, Indiana, and in June 2001, a 6-foot-tall block of granite was dedicated as a memorial to Sylvia in Willard Park in Indiana. So that is pretty much it for this case. I'm sorry I wasn't really involved. I kind of just relayed information, but this is my first video, so I just was kind of wanting to get the point across of all of this information. I'm going to link below in the description the sources I used to gather this information. Also, one of the links is the Sylvia Likens homepage. There you will also see transcripts of the whole court process of Gertrude's trial. So if you are interested, I will link that below. It's very interesting. There's so much information. Thank you so much for listening. This was a very hard case for me to cover, but I felt like there was not very much attention to it, or at least there isn't any now. Just kind of wanted to shed light on this case because I think Sylvia deserves it. Again, I will also link, if I could find some trailers to An American Crime and The Girl Next Door, I will put them in the description as well if you want to check them out. So if you have any other requests of some cases you'd like me to cover and go over, because I do plan to make more of these videos, let me know. And I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye.